Hello, everybody. This is Tan. I'm the founder and CEO of Asian Efficiency. We help people become more productive at work and in life.
And I'm Brooks, the operations director of Asian Efficiency. We're super excited to be here for another podcast recording.
Yeah, this time we're going to be talking about how to stick to your goals this year. And I know we're into 2020 right now, and everybody's super excited about making sure that, they have their New Year's resolutions, they have their goals set up. And if you're somebody who has trouble sticking to their goals, then you're going to love this episode. But before we get to the content today, I want to make sure that we share some of our favorite resources as of lately. And Brooks, you have a few here written down that you would love to share with the listener. So can you do that in 90 seconds or less?
All right, I will do my best. So our top 3 resources for this episode is number 1, Giftology, which is a book by John Ruhlin, and it's all about using gifts as a way to solidify relationships with people that are important to you. I really enjoyed this book. I think it was a recommendation from you, Tan, I believe. Yeah, I thought it was a really great episode. I enjoyed it a lot. Or book, I should say, and I enjoyed it a lot. Number 2 is the Vessi waterproof knit shoes. So if you use Instagram, these folks advertise a lot on Instagram. However, I bought a pair on a recommendation from a friend, and they're great. So they're slip-on, or they have lace version 2 shoes that are very comfortable. But the cool thing about them is, versus say Allbirds or something like that, is these Vessis are waterproof. So that's important if you live in a place like Vancouver, like I do. You want your feet to be dry, and I really enjoy the Vessis. So that was a great recommendation from a friend. And the final is Ibble, which is an iOS app. I'm not sure if they have an Android version. Apologies for not checking on that, but it's a finance app that helps you learn how to do investing and become familiar with that without having to put your own money at risk at the beginning. So Ibble is a fun app for that, and that's the top 3 resources.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And we'll have links to everything in the show notes as well. So if you're listening in your podcast app, just go through the app to see that. And if you're listening anywhere else, you can go to theproductivityshow.com/281 and grab all the links there as well. So let's talk about how to stick to your goals this year. And we came up with this episode because we know a lot of people are super excited about their goals right now. And if you're somebody who has always struggled with accomplishing their goals, then you're going to love this episode, right? And if you're somebody who is super excited and then February comes around and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can do this, or you kind of lost momentum, then you definitely need to listen to this episode, because we're going to share a lot of actionable takeaways that you can implement that is super simple. And maybe you're somebody who makes really good progress, and then when the half year point comes around, right, we're around June then, and you're like, oh man, I don't know if I can still accomplish my goals, or I'm way behind, I'm just going to give up. Then we're going to share some tips as well for you to make sure that you still stick to it, right? Especially if this goal is really important to you. And maybe you're somebody who generally hits all of their goals and you're always looking for ways to do things better. We're going to share some of our personal examples of how we've done things in the future, and also what we are going to do this year with some of our more advanced strategies that you can copy as well.
Yeah, and goal hitting, our last few episodes, we've talked about reviewing the previous year, and then we've talked about making your goals for this new year. So in this case, when we're recording, it's 2020. The problem with that, though, is if you have a goal, and especially a goal that is new to you, it can be really difficult to stick to it, because at first there's not a lot of visible progress a lot of times, depending on the type of goals, of course. If it's, say, a fitness goal or something like that, but there's lots of other things, learning a new skill or something like that, it takes a while to make what seems like visible progress, and it can feel uncomfortable. Maybe it's not fun in those early days. Maybe it's painful. Maybe it's frustrating because you're not as good at something as you feel like you should be. So it just can be really discouraging that if it doesn't feel like anything's happening. The other thing is, even if it's not that type of goal, as you start through it, and maybe you're successful at first, you're making good progress on your goals, you're hitting whatever you want to be doing, but inevitably at some point throughout the year, something will come up. Something will come up. You'll have a hard drive crash, you'll have a health issue, you'll have something happen during the year. And and something can come up that can derail that goal. So to try to fix it a lot of time, or at least get through this, a lot of times we try to rely on willpower, which we've talked about multiple times on the podcast, generally doesn't work. I believe TPS283, we did an episode all about this. So the question then becomes, instead of relying on yourself or your willpower, how do we rely on systems or processes or a framework instead of trying to just blindly push through things? And that's what we want to talk about today.
I would concur. And if you're somebody who has repeated quote unquote failure with accomplishing their goals, there's probably a big likelihood that you're probably relying too much on yourself and on your willpower. And as you're going through this episode today, you'll see that we have this like framework or system or process in place that kind of takes you out of the equation almost, so that your success rate will very likely go up. So that's something you want to pay attention to as we are going through this episode. So we have 6 ways to make sure that your New Year's goals and resolutions are going to stick this year. And the first one is to know what you're getting yourself into. So Brooks, can you kind of share with everybody what you mean with that?
Well, a lot of times, I was mentioning earlier, sometimes there can be things that happen, or there can be things that could derail us. And sometimes some of them are a surprise; they just come out of nowhere. But sometimes, if we actually gave some thought to what it is we're trying to do, a lot of times we can foresee some of the challenges. So if you're learning a new skill, you can not just read about the awesome benefits of this new skill. You can read about some of the challenges that people have, and the challenges that people are going to run into. So it's knowing ahead of time the sorts of things you can expect and looking ahead for any roadblocks. So trying to visualize what's going to happen, and just when those roadblocks come up, you know it's just part of the learning process. And also, you want to have a sense of timing as well. So knowing what your schedule is, being realistic about the sorts of things that you have going on, will give you a greater chance of success. So for example, for me, one of my goals for this year, and I've talked about this in the last few episodes of the podcast, is to reestablish and really reaffirm my journaling habit. So for me, one of my goals is to have that consistent journaling process. And I just know, based on myself, my energy levels, my schedule, I just know that if I try to do my journaling process in the evening, it's not going to stick. Maybe I'll have some initial success, but eventually I know I'm going to run into problems. So for me, I'm looking ahead. I'm knowing that evening process is not going to work. So I know I need to make sure to focus on having it in, for me personally, the morning will work better. So it's looking ahead and establishing it that way.
I can hear the pitchforks already coming out, Brooks, because some people that are listening right now are going to go, Brooks, that sounds great. And I love that you can think ahead. But sometimes I just don't know what I'm getting myself into, right? I'm going to learn this new thing, or I'm going to do this other thing. And Brooks, you already mentioned on another podcast that you already did journaling at some point. So you kind of know what you're getting yourself into. But what about me? What about me? Like, I don't know what I'm getting myself into. What would you tell those people?
Well, yeah, there's definitely times that surprises happen. Health issues come up, or it's just something totally unexpected. So, what I would recommend in that case is, first of all, be flexible. But understand that things are going to come up, and maybe you need to dial back your goal. Instead of 100%, maybe dial it back to 75% or something like that, or be a bit more flexible. But also, what you can do is just do that regular check-in and adjust. If you're staying on top of your goals, and you're doing some of the things we're going to talk about in a minute with tracking and reviewing, then you can kind of see where you are, and you can make adjustments throughout the year, instead of just having a roadblock come up and just throwing up your hands and just be like, forget it, I've hit some adversity, it's time to shelf this one. A lot of times we have the ability to be a bit more flexible than we think, so it doesn't have to be an all or nothing situation.
Yeah, it's not like you're going to be able to plan everything ahead, right? And there's something that you will inevitably run into that you just don't know what will happen, right? We see this all the time as we're running Asian efficiency, where we help people become more productive at work. as much as we plan sprints and know like, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, sometimes it's new stuff and we will anticipate roadblocks or things that might be a pitfall, but there's always stuff coming up that we're like, man, we never saw that coming, right? And that's going to be happening to you as well as you're setting your goals. And so to echo what you were saying earlier, Brooks, being flexible, having some sort of like outlook in terms of, hey, I'm going to run into stuff, but I need to know that I'm going to be okay with that and then figure out a way to get around that. So it's not even just even having a concrete plan of knowing everything that's, might be a potential roadblock, but just the idea of like planning ahead and saying, hey, I know I'm going to run into something. When that happens, I'm going to be okay with it, right? So I'm watching like a lot of basketball games, and the LA Lakers, that's my team, and they're on a winning streak right now, right? And they're doing great. And they asked one of the players, how do you forecast what's going to happen next, right? Or like, how do you make sure you stick to this? And one of the players, his name's Anthony Davis, he said, you know what, we're going to be prepared for adversity. We know we're going to run into stuff. We're just looking at one game at a time, and we know whether this winning streak keeps on going or not, we're going to run into adversity. And when that happens, we need to be able to pick ourselves up and get back on track and make sure that, we're on the road to winning a championship. And it's kind of the same idea here, right? Like when you have your goal set, you know what you want to accomplish. There's going to be some setbacks, whether it's health, family, travel. There's always going to be stuff coming up. Just be mentally prepared for that so that you know that when that does come up, you're like, aha, I see it happening right now. It's not a big deal, right? I might get a week behind or something. Let's just get back on track, right? It's just like if you had a bad meal last night, and you like ate a little too much, like I did last night, it's not the end of the world, right? Like just readjust today and going forward. So that is tip number one here, to make sure that you know what you're getting yourself into. So let's move on to tip number two, and that is to focus on one resolution at a time, or one goal at a time. And if you've been following this podcast for a while, you know that we always talk about doing one thing at a time. Like if you want to focus and get something accomplished, it's better to do one thing at a time rather than multiple things at once or at the same time. And so it's better to set one goal and really focus on that and making sure that you're hitting that goal, rather than say, hey, let me try to hit 3 smaller goals, work at them all at once, and then hope for the best that it will work out, right? And then I think most of us are over enthusiastic, and that includes me as well. I'm always looking for ways to accomplish 2 goals if I can, or 3, and it sounds more efficient and it looks more efficient that way. But history has just shown so many times it's better to do one thing at a time rather than multiple.
Yeah, and this can actually take a surprising amount of discipline. For example, using the example of AE and the goals that we have, this has happened so many times where we know, we're more successful if we focus on one goal and really focus on that. And we all know that going in. But when we get together for our planning and that sort of thing, all of a sudden we have like 2 or 3 goals that we really, really want to do. And so it takes the discipline to say, nope, all 3 of those sound fantastic, but we really, really need to focus on one. And this is a constant struggle that I think we all have personally, and also professionally as well. Because a lot of times, if you really, really think about the goals that you have, if you sit down and you write down your goals, and maybe after the last podcast episode, you've come up with a number of them. If you actually really look and analyze the goals, a lot of times the goals that we have are actually counterproductive. Like really focusing on one is going to mess up another one. So you've got to choose which goal you want to focus on. Otherwise, you're going to have 2 or more things that are in opposition. That's just going to get you pretty much nowhere. For me, like going back to what we were talking about, for me, there's a lot of things that I could do, a lot of things that I want to do, but I had to really decide, okay, I'm kind of designing my morning. I know after step number 1, I know that I really want to focus on reestablishing my journaling practice and make sure that that is something that sticks. So for me, anything else that I want to put in that morning, I have to be very careful of that, because something else that I put in this morning time does have the potential of messing up the journaling practice. So I need to be very, very cognizant that that is the central thing, and then everything else I kind of work around it.
What you said about the three or multiple goals and how they can even be counterproductive to each other is like so true, right? So for example, for me, when I look at 2020, my number one goal is to learn salsa, being able to go to any salsa club, uh, approach any girl or woman there and say, hey, let's go for a dance for one song and be fully confident and having a great time, right? Like that's like quote unquote my definition of done, or my definition of success is to be able to go to any country or any city in the world, go to a salsa club and dance with a woman on to a particular song and be good at it, right? And I have so many other goals that I want to accomplish at the same time. I want to travel the world. I want to go to Africa. I've never been to Africa. I've always wanted to go to South Africa, right? Because it has that relationship in history with the Netherlands where they speak Afrikaans, which is based on Dutch. So I'm always fascinated by that. And I want to go to Egypt and stuff. And I want to go to Vietnam, visit some family there. And I want to attend all these personal development seminars and workshops that I've been dying to go to, right? I want to go to New Zealand. I want to do X, Y, and Z. I have so many things that I want to do, and I want to have like fitness goals and blah 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 blah, right? So super excited, but I realistically cannot accomplish all of them in the same year, right? So I have to pick one of them, and they also kind of conflict with each other because if I have a fitness goal and I want to travel, oftentimes for me, based on my past history, they kind of conflict with each other because if I travel, guess what? I'm going to be eating out a lot. I'm going to enjoy the local foods, and oftentimes it's not always the best for you, and that kind of conflicts with my health goal or my fitness goal, right? And sometimes they do conflict with each other, and sometimes they're supplementary, right? So like if you have a salsa goal and like a fitness goal, they kind of go hand in hand because it's exercise, right? But most of the time I see them being conflicting, and the challenge then becomes, okay, I can only pick one. What do I pick? And if you know how to prioritize your goals, your to-do list in general, you find this an easier process. But I've always found it so challenging. And the thing I always ask myself is either, what would make me the happiest, or what's the biggest domino that will then make all the other dominoes fall, right? And so if I can pick the one that is most meaningful to me, then everything else usually becomes a lot easier, right? So for me, being able to dance salsa as an example would open up so much more travel in the future, because then I can go to South America and go to all these like Latin countries and be able to dance there, right? So that opens up more opportunities for me to travel than I'm even thinking about right now. So that would make more sense for me. And the personal development stuff, I mean, I can always go to that at some point. Like there's no really rush to attend one of those. So for me, if I think about salsa, travel, and personal development, I would say salsa probably unlocks the most things. That's probably my domino that will unlock everything else. And so those are just some things for you to consider. But again, just focus on one thing at a time, no matter how challenging it will be. I know it's going to sound difficult. And I know a lot of you are thinking, well, Tan, I have a goal at work and I have a goal in my personal life. And I'm like, yes, that's great. But try to focus on one as much as you can before you move on to the next one.
So I'm just trying to anticipate questions that people are going to have, and I have a suspicion this is going to be a question that someone would ask after this. Are we saying that you should only focus on one thing for the entire year, or are you saying that sure you can have multiple goals for the year, but just don't worry about goals number 2 and 3 until you've accomplished or at least are like well on your way of accomplishing goal number 1? So is it just like one goal for the whole year, or just make sure you're focusing one at a time?
I would say focus on one thing at a time. And if you want the longer answer, you would have to listen to next week's episode. So you'll have to wait. No, I'm just kidding. We'll answer it here today. But I would say, yes, you can have multiple goals for sure. But I would say focus on just one of them at a time. And if you've been following us for a while, you know that we really strongly prefer quarterly goals over annual goals, right? But if you're stubborn enough, you want to stick to your annual goals, you still can do that. Just realize that quarterly is a little faster. It has a more sense of urgency. You're more likely to accomplish a lot of things, especially if you break stuff down. So we're big fans of that. But yeah, you can have multiple goals, but I would say focus on one the most, and then all the other stuff is kind of like, it's kind of there. You kind of do it, right? Like, just because I focus on salsa doesn't mean that I'm going to be completely eliminating travel, right? I'm still going to travel. That's just in me, and I would love to visit South Africa and Vietnam and stuff like that, and I might still do that, but it's not like a conscious thing for me to be like, okay, I need to book this on my calendar this year right now. If it happens, it happens, and that's something that's there. But I'm not going to focus on it as much as compared to my salsa goal.
Yeah, Katie brings up an interesting point. So, if you don't know, we record these podcast episodes live in front of our dojo, which is our online productivity community. You can check that out at theproductivityshow.com/dojo. Anyway, Katie is giving a good example in the chat as we're recording this that's really relevant to goal number 2 and goal number 1. She's just finishing up her PhD, and she expects to be finished by the end of Q1 in 2020. So congratulations, Katie. I have no doubt that you will. So what she's saying is, just because she knows this last period of getting her PhD over the line is going to be such a gong show, that's my word, not hers, that she's not even going to focus on setting goals until after that for the rest of the year, because she knows any goal that doesn't relate to that, that she might try to accomplish in Q1 is just not going to happen. So for her, she's setting her kind of start date after Q1. And I think that's a really, really smart, I personally think that's a really, really smart approach. It's all about setting yourself up for success.
Love that, Katie. Keep it going. So that is tip number 2, to focus on one resolution or one goal at a time. So let's move on to tip number 3 here, and that is to break down the actions that will take you to your goal, right? So what most people end up doing is they say, hey, I want to do this, I want to accomplish that, and then they just hope that it will happen somehow, right? And then they show up for work, and they're like, okay, I'm just going to go and then do their thing, and then somehow it will, when December rolls around, they're like, okay, my goal is accomplished somehow, right? That that does not work that way. It doesn't result into anything. So what you really want to make sure of is that you really start to think about what are the actions that you have to take for you to accomplish that goal, right? So on a high level, if your goal is weight loss, the actions that you might have to take is exercise, watching what you eat, nutrition, sleep, that kind of stuff, right? So just very high level. So if you think about any goal, you have to start thinking about, okay, what are some of the high level action steps that I need to take in general? And then from there, you can kind of break it down into really nitty gritty granular stuff that you have to do on a daily or weekly basis, right? So as an example, for my salsa goal, being able to go to a salsa club anywhere in the world and dance with a woman to a particular song or a random song, what are some of the actions that I need to take to accomplish my goal, right? So for me, because it's a skill and it's a kind of like, even the definition of success is a little arbitrary because it's not, for example, numeric, right? It's not really black or white. If you had a weight loss goal, it's easy to say, okay, if I hit 150 pounds or something, I'm done, right? But if I dance with a woman and I'm like messing up, does that count? Or, is that still valid, right? So that's a little, arbitrary in that sense, but we'll just roll with that, right? So for me, if I want to accomplish that particular goal, what are some of the actions that I need to take? One is, for me, I know that if I just show up for salsa classes once or at least twice a week, preferably, then eventually I will be able to have enough skill and enough confidence to be able to do that, right? And so what I would do then is I would basically either prepay for a lot of my classes, because once money is involved, I'm more likely to follow through on that, right? Second thing is I will put it on my calendar. So I will put those classes on my calendar as far ahead as I can, right? So here in Austin, I take these classes now that are Tuesdays and Thursdays from 7 till 8:30, right? So I know if I block that off on my calendar and kind of like RSVP that I'm coming, I will not even make my assistant RSVP. I will do it myself, because doing it myself will force me to actually go to it, right? And so, and then I will say, okay, if I miss a class, or if I don't hit, 4 weeks times twice a week, 8 classes a month, then I have to make up for it somehow, whether it's like another class the next week or more classes next month somehow. but I want to make sure, if I miss something, that I make up for it somehow, right? And then also another action that I could take is to quote unquote stress test it, meaning, okay, it's one thing to dance in class, it's another thing to actually go to a salsa club and then dance to a song that you have no clue about, right? So if I go to a salsa club at least once a month and kind of like quote unquote stress test it, then I know where I'm at and I can make adjustments based on that too. But that's an action that I have to take. And also I would then pre-book it on my calendar, say, okay, what is a salsa club? What's their night? Let me put that on my calendar and I'll just go and I'll see how good I am. And if not, then I'll make up for it some other time. And so just think about your goal and what kind of high level actions that you need to take. And then from there, kind of break it down to like nitty gritty stuff.
Yeah, imagine if you took salsa lessons, but you only learned how to dance to one particular song, then you'd be in trouble. You'd have to sit there until your song came on. What you're saying about, I really like how you describe the process for having your goal of being able to do salsa dancing and then breaking it down into what you need to do. Because I actually just finished reading a book. It's called Peak: The Secrets from the New Science of Expertise by Anders Ericsson. And the book is all about the concept of deliberate practice. And one thing I like about your approach is it takes kind of like that deliberate practice model where what some people might do is if some people might want to learn to salsa dance, maybe they would skip to one of your step, which is going to those salsa socials. And so you go and you get a little bit better and you get a little bit better, but by blocking it off and focusing on lessons and prepaying and focusing on those lessons to improve specific parts so that you can actually do the things that you want to do, you're not kind of learning, you're not kind of hoping you get better by doing the thing. You're specifically focusing on practice and improving. And so it's all about this. Step number 3 is all about breaking down the things, those specific things that you need to do to improve, and then make sure you're taking actions to accomplish those as well. For me, for going with my journaling practice goal, basically I need to first of all decide when I'm going to journal. So we already talked about that. I've decided I'm going to do that in the morning. Next, decide what I'm going to use. Am I going to use a notebook beside the bed? Am I going to use a specialized app like Day One? Am I going to use just Evernote or text files or something like that? So it's figuring out ahead of time how I'm going to journal and what I'm going to use. And then finally, for some people, this might be overthinking it, but not for me, is deciding what prompts I'm going to use for journaling. For example, what some people, when they quote unquote journal, they're just sitting down at a blank page and writing out their thoughts. For some people, that works really well. Phil in the dojo chat makes a good point that journaling doesn't have to, because a lot of times, a lot of people resist journaling because they don't want to do a bunch of writing. But Phil makes a good point that journaling doesn't actually have to involve that much writing. You can even do a few points a day. And if you want, you can make it more a structured thing where you're responding to specific questions. And that tends to work better for me as if I'm responding to specific prompts versus just having an empty page. But for other people, they might not like those constraints and would prefer to just have it more free form. So it's all about thinking about what's going to work best for you and then figuring out those actions that will actually take you there.
And sometimes it might be easier for you to think about your end goal and then to think about what do I need to do and working your way backwards that way to figure out what are the actual steps that I need to take, right? So to give a example of that would be to say if my goal is to have my body weigh at a certain amount, right? Like I want to weigh like 150 pounds or something, maybe like 170 right now. So you want to drop 20 pounds. What are some of the ways that you can work backwards and say, how do I get to that, right? And so you could think about, okay, I need to exercise on a regular basis, right? I need to eat, certain amount of food every day or certain types of food. And then work your way backwards to then say, okay, what does that look like on the day-to-day basis or on the weekly basis, right? And so it's kind of just a slightly different angle to get to the same idea of like, what are the action steps or actions that we need to take that will eventually lead to the goal? So that is tip number 3. Tip number 4, and that is to create rituals that will support that goal. Now, if you're somebody who's new to the productivity show and you've never heard of this word rituals, which we like to bring up all the time, it's basically our version of a habit, but that's a little bit more specific, and that is broken down in a lot of action steps that you then take, right? So when it comes to accomplishing your goals, think of it as a way to the way to accomplish that is by taking actions all the time, right? And if you make those actions habitual or you make them a ritual, then eventually it's going to lead to that goal. So as an example, if I want to drop weight, I know if I create the habit or I create rituals around exercise, then eventually I will get to that weight loss goal, right? And just like if I want to have a journaling habit or a practice, I know that I need to journal every single day and make that a ritual so that I will eventually be a person that journals every single day, right? And just like for me, if I want to be a good salsa dancer, I know that I need to create this habit or ritual of showing up for salsa lessons every single week, right? And some goals are easier to do on a daily basis because that's inherently the case. For example, with journaling, you can do that every day and kind of practice that. And some goals have very quote unquote inconsistent actions. They might take place like once a week or twice a week. And there's a little bit of a gap, and sometimes you can't practice it every day or do it every day, and that's fine too, right? So, for example, with my salsa goal, yes, I could technically dance salsa every day, but if I'm being realistic with my schedule, that is just not going to happen, right? But I can set aside Tuesday nights and Thursday nights to work on my salsa moves, right? And that's something that I will take into account as I'm building my habits, right, around that, or as we like to say, rituals. And so I want to always think about ways to make sure that I'm sticking to showing up on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And for me, getting really clear on the why of why I'm doing this allows me to be more consistent. Because some of you who are listening, you might say, "Well, that's great for you, Tan, because you can stick to your calendar or whatever." But I can't really do that. Like, what do I need to do? And oftentimes, when you see that challenge, it's oftentimes what I see is that you're just not really clear what really motivates you to do this, like to accomplish this goal, right? And getting really clear on the why, which we've talked about in a lot of episodes in the past, it's something that you really want to get clear on. Like you want to be able to emotionally connect with what you're doing, right? And oftentimes, most of us logically connect with something. Yes, I want to drop 20 pounds, but why is it that you want to do that, right? And then oftentimes it gets to something very emotional. And so for me, my why to be able to dance salsa, like logically would be say, oh, that's a really cool skill. I'm going to be able to dance salsa, right? And that's cool and all, but if I miss a class, am I really going to tell myself, yeah, it'd be cool to be able to dance salsa? Like that's not going to motivate me to come back to salsa class, right? But if I really dig deeper and figure out, okay, why is it that I really want to do this? And you ask yourself why multiple times. One of the things that I'm really inspired by is to be a Renaissance man, right? And the idea of a Renaissance man is somebody who has lots of different skills and in different areas of life, and is just considered quote unquote like a very unique man or a very unique person, like that is almost quote unquote enlightened, but not necessarily in a spiritual sense, but just like in a super badass sense, right? So imagine a guy who has like a artistic side, can paint or can dance or has like photography skills or something. Somebody who's really good with numbers, somebody who's in really good shape, somebody who can fight, yeah, and self-defend and fight and kill people if needed, right? Like if you meet that kind of person, you go, oh, that is a badass. Like that is a Renaissance quote unquote man. Like that has so many talents, and that is something that I'm really inspired by, right? And so for me, being able to be inspired by that allows me to pick up something like salsa because that's something that I don't know how to do. I'm a very logical person. I'm very good with numbers, right? You can ask Brooks, like I look at numbers all day long and I can look at spreadsheets and see patterns and formulas and all that great stuff. But I'm terrible when it comes to being super artistic, right? And so dancing is something that I've realized like that would be something really fun for me, to kind of like clear up that artistic side of being a quote unquote Renaissance man. And it's also a really cool partner dance. So you do it with somebody else, right? And so that to me is really inspiring. And when I tell myself that, that really motivates me to keep going on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Katie says she's picturing you as as a millennial Bugsy Malone. So there you go. You can roll with that. one one trick for establishing these rituals that will support your goal. And this is something that in episode 217, so TPS 217, with author James Clear, who talks about more about this in his book Atomic Habits, is tying the ritual or the habit that you want to do to another thing that you're going to be doing anyway. So it makes it kind of part of the process. So for me, one thing we do here at Asian Efficiency, I don't know if we've really talked about this on the podcast before. This would be an interesting topic someday, maybe, is every single one of us posts every single day, well, every week, work day, something called a daily update, where it's a page in Confluence, which we post what we're going to be working on today and what we're going to be committing to today. And so this is something we all do. And so what I've done is I've tied my journaling habit to creating that daily update, because it's kind of related in a way. I'm thinking about what I'm going to be doing that day, and so stacking that habit stacking is what James Clear calls it. Stacking that journaling habit with something I'm going to be doing anyway, which is my daily update. They just kind of lead together and relate together very well. So so that is a trick that I've used to kind of tie those habits together.
So again, creating rituals around supporting your goal is super, super important. So I would say most people who fail at accomplishing their goals oftentimes miss this particular step, right? And it's one thing to break it down, like we talked about in the last step. It's another thing to actually create rituals around it. And I think that's where people fall off. So if you're somebody who has a low success rate with their goals, this is the area that you really want to focus on the most. So again, that is tip number 4. So let's move on to tip number 5 here, and that is to come up with a way to track those particular rituals. Right? So in the last step, we talked about how you should come up with those rituals and establish them. Now we want to talk about how to track them, because the more you can track your rituals and kind of keep count, the easier it is for you to stick to it, but also to adjust along the way. So as an example, with my salsa goal, how do I track if I'm making progress or not, right? Well, one of the ways I can keep track of that, of my ritual, meaning showing up for class, is to simply ask myself, how often did I show up this particular month or this past month for class, right? And like I said earlier, I want to show up every Tuesday and Thursday and at least one social a month. And so that means 8 classes and 1 social a month, right? Those are quote unquote my metrics. So now I can say, okay, if the new month comes around and I do kind of a review, which we'll talk about next, did I actually go to 8 classes? And if I did, then I'm on point. But if I, start traveling, or I was sick one week, or I just couldn't go for, whatever reason, maybe there was a work emergency or something like that, right? And I had like maybe 6 classes in 1 month, then I'm like, okay, I can see that, I missed 2 classes. That's kind of like setting me back a little bit, right? Let's make sure that I book more classes this upcoming month or this upcoming week, right? And now I can get back on track. And so when you know how to track your rituals, then you can make those adjustments. But if you don't know how to keep track of things, it's kind of difficult to make adjustments, because you're just going off on how you feel or what you think is going on, or and there's no really clear vision or optics in sight that kind of allow you to make adjustments. So getting really clear on how you can track those things makes it really easy for you to adjust and then stay on point.
Yeah, and sometimes there's apps that will help you with this. There's apps where you can use to track a habit. Sometimes the tool you're using to do the tool you're using to do your whatever your goal is actually has this built in. So for example, if your goal was to establish a meditation practice, an app that we've talked about on the podcast before, calm.com, and I'm sure most meditation apps work this way as well, will track your current streak of how many days you've meditated in a row. And so it also almost becomes, you're doing it for the benefits of the meditation, but also you don't want to break that streak. So that can be an additional motivation to kind of keep going. So lots of journaling apps have that, lots of meditation apps. all that sort of thing. For me, I have a recurring task in OmniFocus to make sure that I journal. So if I've broken that, I'll know right away because I'll have that the red OmniFocus task there. So that becomes kind of a reminder / tracking mechanism for me as well. So look for tools that will help you accomplish your goals, and look for a tool that might have the ability to track it within the tool as well. And even if you're using pen and paper, you can do like a bullet journal sort of thing. You can do the X on the calendar. You can find an easy way to do the tracking. Like if, say, you had a health goal and you wanted to track your calories, well, yeah, you could write it down in a notebook and look up the calories online or calculate it somehow and keep tabs in a notebook. You might find it easier to use a tool like MyFitnessPal, which has a ton of food and recipes built in and a barcode scanner. So it makes it super, super easy to track, because the easier it is to track these things, the easier it is to keep that ritual and routine going, and the more likely it is that you're going to keep on track with your goal.
You don't want this to be a chore. As soon as it becomes something that feels like a chore, it becomes more of a friction point rather than something that's going to help you, right? And you don't have to go super granular either. It has to be as simple as like something that you can do very quickly, right? So for example, with my salsa goal, I could say, okay, I want to hit, 5,000 hours or something, or 10,000 hours, but then am I going to be the person who will start a timer when I go to salsa class and then ends my timer and then puts it in a Google sheet or something and then has like a formula, that calculates how many hours I've done, right? Well, that technically, yes, I could do that if I was that crazy, but that becomes more of a chore, right? And so I simplified that by saying, did I just show up for class and how often? If I did, great. If I didn't, okay, let's just make an adjustment from there. So again, keep it really simple. Don't try to make it complicated or making it a chore. Make it really, really simple for yourself. Again, so that is tip number 5. Come up with a way to track your rituals. So the final tip that we have here, and that is tip number 6, is to establish a review. And what do we mean with that? When we set a goal and we want to make sure we accomplish it, we have to check in on a regular basis and then make adjustments as needed, right? Success is really never a linear process. It's never a straight line that just you do X and then eventually you'll get there. You'll run into roadblocks, right? You might get sick, work emergencies, stuff just happens all the time, right? And it's key for us to be able to make adjustments along the way. And the best way to do that is, again, to keep track of things. But then also, once you do keep track, we need to look at that every now and then to make sure that we are actually on track, right? And so going back to my salsa goal earlier, if I only had 6 classes that I showed up for 1 month, then I'm a little bit behind because I was committed to doing 8 a month, right? So when I do my review, whether that's on a weekly basis or every 2 weeks or once a month, I want to be able to check in with that, right? And so once you know how to score and kind of like track your stuff, then the review process is usually actually pretty easy, right? Just like if you have a weight loss goal, your review could be, or your tracking could be measure your weight every single day. But then the review process could be, let's look at it on a weekly basis, average out the daily weight, because it could fluctuate so much, based on liquids and all that stuff, and then take the average of that and then say, okay, let's plot that in, and am I still on track, or is the trend line going downwards or not, right? Or if you're trying to put on weight, like is the trend line going upwards as well, right? So make that review process something that you really do consistent, and I usually recommend at least once a week, right, or once a month at a bare minimum.
Yeah, and review is something we've talked a lot about on the podcast in the past. An example, we have an episode back in TPS281, so going way back, about a system for reviewing your goals. And we've also done podcasts and articles on reviewing your goals every day. About if you want to get even more hardcore about doing reviews and tracking, the 12-week year, which I know, Tanya, you've already mentioned, is a great framework for doing your goals in 12-week periods, but then always reviewing and tracking as well. And so we've got a dojo course called the AE Way to Implement a 12-week year, which is one of our most popular little mini courses inside the dojo. But yeah, you want to go back, you want to look look at your goal to be actually reminded of that you're still working on this goal. Because sometimes we set goals at the beginning of the period, whatever that is. And if we don't have that regular review, we can kind of forget about them. I'm sure that's happened to many of us, that we go to look at our goals maybe in July, and then we look back at our spreadsheet or whatever we made about our goals, and we realize, oh yeah, I totally forgot I said I was going to do that. Well, you want to avoid that. So tracking and reviewing is one way to always keep your goals front of mind. And so partway through the year, you might even decide through your process of review that this goal is not what you should be focusing on anymore. Maybe there's other goals that have come up. Maybe you've actually maybe you've actually achieved to a level that there's kind of diminishing returns to keeping to focus on this for the rest of the year. Maybe that is something that tells you, oh, okay, it's time to focus on something else. So review helps you keep on track with that. For me, with the journaling, what I find really helpful is to go back and review my journal monthly. This has a lot of benefits, both from a journaling perspective, and we've talked about that in the dojo course we have on journaling, and also previously on the podcast. But just going back and going through the journal through the month is kind of a review to let me know how it is that I've been doing. So yeah, review and tracking and rituals are super important for making your goals stick throughout the year.
So those are the 6 tips for sticking to your goals this year. And as we are coming to the conclusion of this episode, to kind of summarize what we recommend you do is, as you're going through this episode, maybe again, as you're listening to this, just pick one of the action steps that you think you could have the most benefit from, right? So maybe it is the tracking part. Maybe it's the review part. Maybe it is coming up and breaking down the action step that you need to take. Or it's, instead of picking 3 things you're going to work on, it's only one thing. Or it's maybe getting really clear about what you're getting yourself into. Pick one of those areas and work on that first and foremost, right? Because you probably do something already that might be working, might not. And if you add that one tweak to it that we just mentioned today, that can make a big difference, right? So pick one of those areas and implement that right away as you're finishing up this episode. And before we conclude, you can find all the links that we share in the show notes today by going to theproductivityshow.com/281. Thanks for joining us today, guys.